It's great to be able to speak to Dr. Stefan Wagnsson, who's an associate professor in sports science at Karlstad University in Sweden. He was a longtime member of the Swedish national team from 1990 to 2003 in running. He was a 1,500 meter runner as well as a 5K and 10K competitor, and he competed at the very highest level, having competed, as I mentioned, for Sweden internationally. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure.
Maybe you can tell me a little bit about how you got into running.
Well, actually, it's kind of surprising because I was born in a society in a small town called Degerfors, and all the guys were playing soccer, and I had to play soccer too. But ever since I started, my coaches, they always ask me, "Well, Stefan, aren't you going to start running?" Because I was always running on the field, so I hardly never touched the ball. I was just running. And then, I just got into some school events, and I found myself quite good at it. And usually I was on the top of the lists. But my father wanted me to start running, and when your parents tell you and you want to have some autonomy, I tell them no way, I'm going to start running. So I was kicking balls until I was 18, 19 years old. So I was kind of late starter, and then I was thinking about, well, probably I should try, because I couldn't get to the top of the team in the soccer team. I realized that was not a way to excel in sports.
Yeah.
So then I started running.
Was it important for you to excel?
Yeah, I should say so. I was kind of, as we say in the sports, I was kind of ego-oriented, and I was always eager to win in any kind of events that I was participating in. It doesn't matter if I was throwing some balls in a can or something like that. I always wanted to win, and was my kind of personality then.
Right. And so you mentioned you got into really focused in on to running at 18 or 19, which is quite late. How was that transition from soccer into athletics?
Well, actually, it's interesting, and it got me wondering, because I was quite early. I got injured quite soon after that transition, because when I was in soccer, we always ran when we were practicing, and when we were running, I was always get exhausted. Everyone is just running as fast as you can, get tired as you can. So that was my mentality. So when I get started, I get a coach who didn't know my background really. I know my background, but hadn't really trained in some kind of systematic way. So when I was supposed to run in easy way, I mean, I remember I just ran for five times a week or something like that, and it should be 2 hard sessions and 3 more slow sessions. But I just ran as fast as I could. So it was 5 really intense sessions every week, and I got started very well. So at the beginning, my body was just sucking at the training up. So I was going like a rocket. So when I was competing in my first national championship, I was on 3rd place in 3,000 meters.
Wow.
So it was really it was a surprise coming from soccer and just going. And I had always in my mind, I was always a runner. I think I was always running to school. I was always running everywhere. So I was kind of prepared, but not prepared to that high intensity that I was training in the first year. I think it's okay. I think I was lasting for about half a year or something like that, and then I got injured.
Right. What was your injury? What happened?
Oh, it was my calf. On the front of my calf, it's kind of ligaments that were torn like this soon, and after a while it was a stress fracture on the front, because And now later on, I know what it was. It was because I have high balls under my foot, so I had some support there. But I didn't have the shoes I was wearing. I just took any shoes that I had and just ran.
Yeah. So you had kind of the arch in your foot lent itself to, or predisposed you to injury. But it also sounds like you were training in really high intensity and high volumes. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so that was, you said, in your first year of making that adjustment or transition into running. Was the injury before the national competition where you placed third, or was it after that?
No, afterwards, because then I was even more eager to excel, of course, and then we started perhaps with 6 sessions per week and the same intensity. So, I mean, he told me not to run, but I know running for me was just run as fast as you can and as hard as you can. So, of course, if you run five times a week, then you get some opportunities to get some rest, but soon after you cannot really get the rest that you need. So that's why I think we kind of got some miscommunication at the start, me and the coach, but later on we got a hang of it. So we had it. We can come to that later on, but we had we put some intensity scale into our communication, so know how much to.
Yeah. So you started, like, after the injury, it sounds like you realized the importance or the need to communicate with your coach about how intense your training was and kind of the need for more maybe rest or recovery. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So,
and so when you,
on that. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we put a lot of focus on that when I was getting injured, and it was kind of starting on a bad circle of injuries ahead of me then for years.
And so I want to talk some more about kind of subsequent injuries, but after you placed third in your first national championships, you said that kind of spurred you on? Did you think, I can really do something in this sport, or what impact did that have when you did so well in your first national championship?
Yeah, it's nice. I remember the feeling, and I was just so determined to be world champion or Olympic champion. It was really high goals. The sky was the limit. So I remember the feeling. It was real nice, and because if I started thinking, if I trained so little and the other guys, they train twice as much as me, and you just thought about, and I was young and kind of naive, but it was a nice feeling.
Right. So yeah, it definitely sounds like, it sort of really kind of spurred your interest or your motivation. And then maybe you can talk a little bit about what happened, after you had the injury. You said you had further injuries after that. Did that sort of lead? Was it that initial stress fracture? Did that cause you problems down the road, or were there other injuries that you sustained?
Well, when I think back, I think that was the start of the injury circle, because then I was trying to fix that one, and I had some insoles, to fix that one, and they weren't real good, and I tried to mix them and like that, and in the same time I was getting sponsored by a shoe company called Mettle, and it was good running shoes, really good, but I didn't know then, but I had some neutral running. I didn't pronate or supinate or something. It was a neutral runner. But in the shoes you have some small, what do you call it, to prohibit pronation.
Yeah.
So you hardly noticed, So I thought it was good shoes, but it was more like tipping it out. So then you have this because the foot. The arch of the foot is the kind of way it takes takes care of your the power, so it's good. You have to have some kind of
you need the arch for power.
Yeah. yeah, to get the yeah, so the body can to absorb the pushes that when you run. So
Yeah.
but when I put this in, then it would be more stiff. Then I got injured on the other side of my calves, and then my knees, outside of my knees, and also in my hips. So yeah, so it was kind of, but then sometimes, and then I had to do some alternative training to keep up with
Mhm.
so I did some kind of that kind of training. But,
Right.
well,
So it sounds like these inserts then unintentionally led to some other issues that you had, as you mentioned, with
yeah, yeah.
your hips, or when you had some of these injuries with, the stress fracture or other injuries over the course of your career. You mentioned your hips.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the challenges that you experienced in dealing with those injuries, either physically or psychologically?
Mm-hmm. Well, you always, well, in the beginning, I was always thinking about the injuries. You get up in the morning, you just, the first thing you just felt, am I still, I'm still hurt. Yeah, and you push yourself to till it hurts, all the time, just to feel the, am I injured? Is it better? Is it not better? All the time, just tracking the body all the time. So I think it was always on my mind, and it was kind of stressful the first time, because I really wanted to get rid of the injuries. And you saw the other guys who was training, and it was, you never saw them to get injured, but they did, but you didn't notice because
Yeah,
they were injured.
right.
You kind of pulled everyone to one person, and he was always training,
Right.
and you were always in pain or something like that.
Yeah. So you're always kind of thinking, even if other athletes are getting hurt, in your mind, they're all out there kind of training while you're just
Yeah,
trying to manage your injury, or you're not training.
yeah,
And also it sounds like, you said you're kind of constantly thinking about the injury, and what impact it might have, or whether you can continue to push yourself through it.
mhm.
um, you know it sounds like you had pretty lofty goals, and so I wondered if those injuries impacted on your ability to achieve those goals.
Yeah. Well, in the in the first years, of course, and you more like got more realistic in your goals, I think, and it also had connection to what you were achieving, of course, and so I didn't achieve as good as I could, and because I wasn't injured that long. I mean, it was for 2 or 3 months, and then I got better, because I always, well, not the first year, but the second year, I was finding alternative training activities, and I was very, and well, I think that was one of my best coping strategies. I was running a lot of in water
Uh-huh.
with wet vest, and it was kind of a new invention then, and I got those wet vests, and I was training a lot. Before I perhaps I train twice as much, so 10 to 14 times a week, two times a day, because in water you could just push yourself as much as you could.
Yeah.
So then it felt good to just do the training, and just knowing that you were going, yeah, to get
Yeah.
better anyway.
Right. So it sounds like you had a really strong need to continue training. And you said that kind of finding alternative strategies, whether in water,
Yeah,
that
bicycle. Yeah,
helped you cope, you said.
yeah, certainly.
How or why was that sort of alternative training important in helping you cope, I guess, psychologically with
Yeah.
your
Well,
injuries?
yeah, I think it was because then I felt I'll do, and it was one of my uh, top motivated, what I call it, my view on myself. I will always give everything I have.
Yeah.
Uh, uh,
Like your sort of
yeah,
self-concept, or
yeah,
your how you,
always,
how you thought about yourself was the kind of approach of always giving your very best, or
yeah,
100% was important.
yeah.
to you?
Yeah, under the circumstances, I should add. So when I got the circumstances clear, okay, now I'll do everything the best I can to
Yeah.
achieve with those. So and then I was always looking at what can I do now? If I got injured, okay, I was learning more like, okay, I'm injured, I'm accepting that, and how can I move forward without losing pace?
Yeah.
So I was starting looking at, okay, I was, as I told you, there was a new this wet west, and was also mountain biking. So I was looking at that and started competing that while I was resting from running. So I got the competition nerve satisfied.
Yeah, sure. So
So
it's interesting because you mentioned, Stefan, that you were able to accept your injuries, and then you were always looking for ways to maintain your training or to continue to improve. So I know for some injured athletes, certainly there's research showing that for some individuals it can be difficult to come to terms with or accept their injury initially, at least. What helped you to do that, would you say?
Well, experience, and I since I was also experiencing that, when I was getting ready for running, and I was up to a high standard quite soon after I've started. It took me 4 or 5 weeks. Then I was really ahead again. Yeah. So that gave me self-confidence, that I knew that I was, the training I was doing when I was injured was a good way to excel anyway.
Right.
So it gave me self-confidence. So when I got a new injury, well, okay, this is a fact. Now I will have to, of course, work on the injury, but at the same time I can do some proper training, and that made me also more confident and more. I could relax and don't get back too soon, because I knew that it would be very easy to get injured again.
Right. So, was that hard sometimes to maybe, like, earlier on, like before you had experience with injury or success, it sounds like, with modified training? Yeah. Was it hard, like, given again your competitiveness and desire to push yourself, and was it hard to sort of hold yourself back and not return too soon? Or?
No, I don't think so, because I that's why I think I knew that this training was almost as good as the other training, because I could train more without
Right.
getting injuries. So and I had no problems with motivation. It was sometimes it was kind of relief, because there were no pressure on you to excel. Mm-hmm. You just could train, and you come back. No one expected you to be so good. So then it was kind of mentally good to have this relief sometimes, and you find yourself more motivated. Sometimes when you're just pushing yourself and very hard, the motivation is going down, and then when you get hurt, you felt that, well, I really like this and I really want to excel. So you got a second thought of why you actually were doing this task, because there's a lot of pain. And then
yeah.
So I think it's always, so it wasn't always that bad to get injured. Of course, I would like to be non-injured, but it was also a way to find yourself and get answer on the questions. Why are you really doing it? Do you want to do this? And like that.
So was that one of the benefits, would you say, that it helped through those sort of periods maybe where you were reduced in your training or had to modify it, that you said it helped you kind of get in touch with why you were doing it? And you mentioned, running is painful, and certainly, I guess, 1,500 meters is known in particular, isn't it, as a pain event. So I want to come back to that point about pain. But would you say that being able to get in touch with the reasons why you were running, would you characterize that as a benefit of the injury?
Yeah.
You also kind of talked about sort of the fact that, when you had success with alternative training, that it sort of took some pressure off of you. And I'm wondering where that pressure came from. Was that external pressures that you felt the need to meet, or was it internal pressures where you felt the need to meet your own expectations, or was it about pressure from other individuals to come back and perform at a certain level?
That's a good question that I've thought about as a research, because I've been researching about parental pressure a little bit, and I can see now afterwards that, of course, my dad wanted me to excel in running because he never was participating and he was never looking at my games in soccer like that. But when I started to train running, he was always with me in competition. So of course I felt some of that, but I kind of more like it was that pressure was internalized in myself, I think. And also then I put myself, but in some way it was from my parents in some way. But then as I was ego-oriented and was very eager to win, that's also something that put a pressure on me. And so that was also one thing that I started to work with myself mentally. I had started reading books about mental training, and I had a coach who was helping me later on. So I think that triggered me to change the way I was looking at sports, I think. So I was getting more and more pushing myself to get more task oriented. So that helped me also. Yeah.
So, and when you say pushing yourself or there was a shift maybe from that focus really on winning as being your primary focus to more of a task orientation, maybe you can describe what that means in terms of what you were focusing on, like what kinds of tasks were you thinking about?
Well, I was more eager, like when I come back from injury, I will set my new targets, and I was not in relation to others. It was more relation to myself. And also I could not also, I mean, if you're task oriented, you wanted to be better on your personal best, like that, but also set new targets from the way that you're injured, and what am I suspecting to perform on my first races. So I was able to set some realistic goals, instead of just heading for winning or heading for my personal best. So I was getting better to adjust my goals, I would say.
Right. So that sort of focus on more of a task orientation, it sounds like it helped you adjust your goals. And would you say that when you did that, was there some benefit to you in terms of your recovery from injury, or as you were kind of trying to get back into sport after your injury? Did that task focus help you in some way?
Yeah, I think so, because I wasn't that stressed about what other competitors did or do, or when they train. I could just put that aside and just focus on myself. I think that was a good benefit. So, and that benefited me also when I got back on track, because then I had more like that. When you're running and you're looking at everybody, your focus will get away from the task. And then you will get stressed, and that will also affect you on the running. So I was thinking I was also being a better runner when I changed my focus. So I wasn't that stressful. When the going gets tough and you're starting to get nervous about if you will win or not, then you're gone. So I think I was getting a better runner, and I think it was some kind of I was helped by the way that I was kind of injured to help me change my focus.
Yeah, interesting. And I know you mentioned that you have done research, and I'm certainly aware of some of the work that you've done in youth sport, which is one of your main research interests. Would you say that your experience as an athlete is consistent in shifting your focus to the task orientation and the benefits? Is that consistent or different from some of the findings that you found in researching youth sport?
It's amazing how consistent it is. I always, when I read the research concerning youth sports, is always the same same findings you can see in almost every research, that this task-oriented climate or task-oriented disposition, it's almost always beneficial for youths to. So that's why when we're as a lecturer in sports science, I always tell my students to, if you don't know what to do, try to initiate a task-oriented or master-oriented climate.
Right.
Much will be fixed.
Yeah.
That's my experience.
Yeah. So just kind of picking up on that point, I mean, you also mentioned your intense desire to win, and of course the sort of broader culture of sport, and I suppose for many, certainly elite competitors, you know, being on the national team, I imagine there is a strong desire to win. So how does one, let's sort of focus in on injury, I guess, how does one go about creating a task mindset in the case of injury recovery when you're still kind of competing in an environment that can often be very ego oriented, or when, you know, the media or maybe other competitors or parents or fans are really focused on that sort of winning outcome? Or how can the injured athlete create a task focus, would you say?
Well, it's just not just to change it overnight, but it's, you have to work with yourself for a long time, I think, and try it, and because it's a challenge to not try to win sometimes. I wouldn't say that I didn't try to win. I always tried to win. So I would say more like I had a high ego too, I think, and I still have. But I was working with myself to get the task to the same level, you know. And then if you don't win, you can always rely on the task-oriented. So I was kind of, because I think the ego-oriented disposition also, it kind of motivates you too. So I think you need both of them to excel in elite, but I think you have to have a balance between those two.
Right. So I think that's a really interesting point about sort of like, even if you still have that kind of ego focus or that orientation on the outcome or winning, it's maybe more about kind of trying to elevate the task focus as well, so that, you know, let's say, I guess if you're the injured athlete coming back, maybe it's hard to win, I guess, after coming back from an injury. But if there's that task focus, then there's still some other measures of success for the athlete. Would you say that that's accurate? Or
I think so, because in some way I know also that reminds me, because when I was in the pool, I was also thinking about winning the championships and like that, so it also helped me. So I don't think I don't want to get rid of it, but more like having a balance. And I know research also have shown that if you have a balance, it's okay to have that. And so it's not about taking away the winning stuff, but you have to heighten the task oriented.
Right. And maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the uncertainties that you maybe experienced with either your stress fracture, or you mentioned you had subsequent injuries with your hip. Were there things that, as you experienced those injuries, that were going through your mind that you were kind of worried about or uncertain about?
Well, of course, I was, as I told you, I was kind of worried not to come back, you know, because you wanted to excel, you wanted to train, you wanted to be with the group to train, and you were, well, you got some kind of more like in this self bubble, and you're training by yourself mostly than when you were injured. So you also missed the gang, the whole training, guys who was training and the girls who were training with. So that was hard. And then when you're going training camp, I was jogging, I was running in a pool that was 10 times 5 meters. It was 15 or 16 degrees. It was so cold. And the other one, they were running in the mountains and like that. So it was kind of hard. But I think always when you get injured, of course you get anxious about how long will it take until I'm back. And as I said, you always in the morning you're just stretching and finding is it hurting more or not. So you have this VIS scale in your head all the time. Is it 1 or is it 5 or 6, or does it hurt or does it not hurt? Is it better?
Right.
So it constantly you kind of tune in and feel your body very much a lot. So that's what was also one thing that I had to work on when I was training mentally. Not always feel. I had to decide when to feel, to get the feeling in my body, and so in the morning and perhaps in the lunchtime and in the evening. Otherwise, I just let it go. Otherwise, just thinking of it all the time.
Yeah. So it sounds like you mentioned the VAS scale, the pain scale. Were you constantly sort of analyzing or assessing the meaning of the pain you were experiencing?
Yeah. Without knowing it was a base scale, that's only afterwards when I started doing some research and started to reading or studying. But I had my own base scale in my head, and so I was constantly tuning in to my body.
Right. So would you say that that's important for the injured athlete to kind of tune into their body and just understand the meaning of their pain? So to kind of think about, well, is this pain that I'm experiencing something that's harmless, or like, is it a sign or indication that something's wrong with my body? Is that important for the injured athlete to kind of engage in that body analysis, as you put it, or sort of self-awareness exercise?
Yeah, that's a very important question, and it's easy to just tip over, because you have to sense your body. Is this, as you said, is this going to be is it dangerous? Because you always have some kind of pain when you're an elite athlete, and you have to decide, is this pain manageable, or is it on the other side, it's getting to get worse? And sometimes I remember just, well, it's okay, and then you start out, you will a little bit figure out and wondering if it's okay or not, and then you get out and ran, and then it just broke. So it's very difficult, this kind of, but me and my coach, we developed a system based on my feelings, and we set this intensity number of every session. So and we, after a while, we noticed if my training load was over 40, if you do a distance running, that was 2. If you do a heavy interval, it was 8 on a scale to 10. And if you had a really, really tough, hard competition, you were nearly dying, you don't know if you're going to survive or not, that's a 10.
Yeah.
And then we put all those stuff together, and we saw that if I reached over 40, then it would soon be injured. So it was kind of, so we tuned in there, and so we the toughest weeks we never got over 40. Then I was starting to get less injured.
Yeah, so that's interesting, how you kind of developed a self-rating system in conjunction with your coach, and it sounds like it wasn't just about monitoring the pain, but the effort and the intensity that you were putting in. And I thought that was really interesting. You said, like, you noticed that when you monitored it so that the intensity never got above a certain point, that then you started to get injured less. Is that right? Yeah. So again, like, would you say that there's value in your experience for injured athletes to kind of really monitor their training loads and intensity if they're trying to mitigate or reduce injury risk?
So a lot of stuff that you do, when you think back, oh, why didn't I do that earlier? And that this is one stuff that I would like to have. I mean, if I would have that the first year, then we could communicate in a better way, me and my coach, and I don't think that would save me a lot of injuries, I think.
Yeah. So speaking of that, in terms of communication between you and your coach, when when you experienced injury, was the communication or support that you got from your coach, was that important, or was that relevant to your recovery in some way?
Yeah, well, I had two coaches in my career, and one of my coaches, but it was the first coaches. He was more, he was kind of more disappointed, and well, just okay, and he was more not so good when I was injured, I think, because he wasn't that supporting then, I think. Well, he was supporting, but we never talked so much about the injury. He just, oh, is it going to get better like that? Because, but the second coach I had, he was more, he was very good, and he was also, he was mental training for the Olympic teams in Sweden later on, but he was very, very good at listening and also monitoring the pain, because we more systematically, if I got injured, well, let's do this, and then we tried this part, and then if it didn't work, then we tried another stuff. So it was always a communication. I think we communicated more when I was injured than I was when I was free of injury. So,
right.
And I think, yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I think as a coach, I think as me as an athlete, I think a lot of athletes too, they want more communication with coaches when they're injured. Otherwise, you just go with the flow, and you don't need so much when it's
yeah. So it's interesting because you mentioned that it's when you're injured that you might need more communication, but there's certainly evidence to suggest that athletes get less of it when they're injured. And as you maybe alluded to with your first coach, that it doesn't sound like there was a lot of communication when you were injured, more just like, oh, are you getting better? But you also, go ahead, sorry.
I think the first coach was, I think he was stressed. He didn't know how to manage. So I think he would be, he should be perhaps doing a course in sports psychology or something like that.
Yeah. And you talked about the fact that your second coach was a good listener. So was that a valuable source of support, or I guess type of support, that helped you through injury?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I felt listening, because when you're hurt, you always feel a little bit guilty. And you feel like you have to defend yourself to your coach. That was my impression by the first coach, and that wasn't a good thing, because you wanted to be, you were doubting, is he think that I'm weak or like that, and that's kind of stuff were going on in my head. And I think a lot of athletes I've talked about have said the same thing. So it's, so there's a lot of crazy stuff going on, and I'm not sure afterwards it wasn't that light. It was more like he didn't know what to do, and he got uncertain. But that's what's going on, and I think that's also one thing that gets you injured, because you feel that you're perhaps going to get injured, but then you say, oh well, I don't want to be a coward. I want to be strong. I want to be a tough guy.
Yeah.
I'm a real athlete, so I just go out even though I have some pain. I always show them I can manage pain, because in this sport you have to manage pain. So it's kind of a central part of being a runner is to cope with pain. So it's very difficult to know is this a pain, because you can manage pain in such a heavy load. So manage a stress fracture. It's no big deal. It's just hurting.
So yeah, how do you, or how did you manage pain? Was it different for when you were injured versus, I guess you also said as a runner you always have some level of pain, I guess, as an elite runner. But let's say after you had your hip problems or the stress fracture, was the way in which you managed the injury related pain different than, say, how you would manage the pain of putting in an all-out effort in a 1,500-meter race? Or is it the same kind of skill?
Yeah, I think so, because I think, no, I would say it was the way that you will manage pain will cost you some injuries, because when you get the more you train, the more you could push your limits, and that also in some way influenced that you were more it's only pain, and when you get injured, you as long as you didn't get it didn't affect your performance, then you just go on, even though how much pain. If I had some tendon in my Achilles tendon is really pain in that, and at the first running, the first 5-10 minutes, you just was pain. Then after a while, you managed, but in a sense, you if you look back, you should just stop there and stop running just 2 or 3 months before that. But it was only pain, and it was okay after a while. Mm-hmm. But then it was so much. It affected your running so much performance. You couldn't run high on your toes and like that, and you saw that your time is getting worse and like that. So then I'm injured. So I stopped.
Yeah. So it wasn't until the pain actually had a negative impact on your performance that in your case you actually stopped. But you're saying, looking back, you probably would have stopped sooner or realized, okay, well, I don't need to wait until the pain starts negatively impacting my performance. I'm gonna, something's not right here, and maybe that, who knows, I guess, might have impacted your career. But it's interesting also because
I just because I've also been helping some floorball team with their physio training, and I was very hard on that one. If you just feel just a little bit, just rest and so I think in one season, the one season before, when we hadn't got any serious injury in that season. So I told them it's my philosophy. Take every small injury seriously, then we get rid of them. So I think it's kind of, I would say that would be one of my main parts in my philosophy about injuries and training.
Right. So it sounds like your philosophy has certainly been influenced by your own experiences with pain and injury as an elite runner. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the types of expectations that an athlete might have in terms of their recovery, or whether, you talked about time, for instance, and that sort of a key focus for injured athletes. So is there some expectation that, okay, this is going to take a certain amount of time to recover? Is that a kind of main expectation that an athlete might have?
No, actually, because we had some teams that we had to do, but not like in USA or like for the school team or like that. So, there was some relays and that like that, and they were asking, are you going to be get rid of the injuries? But no, I was more like managing my own recovery process. I think so. I didn't feel any stress from the others.
Right.
More like support from the training group. So that was not the stress. I think it was more like I felt I was very very supported from my training.
How did your training partners support you, or what was it that made you feel supported?
Well, they wanted me to come with them when we're on training camp. So, you should go. We'll try. You can bike. You can run in water and come with us and like that. And also trying to meet up with the guys in the training arenas and hang out with them. And and they also called me, and we're having other stuff to do, and like we were kind of very tight gang, and we were also friends outside of or sports. So I was feeling really appreciated as a person, not just like an athlete.
Yeah. And so that the fact that they kind of wanted you to go with them on training camps, or they would reach out to you, what benefit did that have in terms of your recovery, or did it?
Yeah, well, that felt I didn't feel stressed about that. They wanted me to come back, but it was on my conditions. I think I've never felt that they were pushing me like, you have to come back. You have to be. You have this important race like that. And actually not my coach either. He wasn't that pressing. He was just more passive, you know. And I understand afterwards that it was because he didn't know what to do. He hadn't got the coping strategy. I think he got more stressed than me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Do you think that the fact that you weren't on sort of time lines or time constraints, I guess, to get back for certain competitions, was that helpful in some way looking back? Yeah. How so, would you say?
Well, it didn't feel any stress from anybody. So you could take your time. And of course, I wanted to get back, but as I told you later and before, that I was more as time goes by. I knew how that it was good for me, and I could take my time.
Right.
And as I had some good trainings with alternative training, so I didn't feel stressed. Yeah. And for sure, when I was getting older, I knew when to go back, and I knew I had to. Well, when I'm good, now I take 2 more weeks to get proper good.
Yeah. So, and as you said, Stefan, like, you know, as time went on and with the benefit of experience, you knew that taking more time wouldn't necessarily set you back, or that you could still kind of, you know, do the training or rehabilitation that you needed to, and that you could still come back and compete effectively. And I imagine for a lot of maybe younger athletes or those with not as much injury experience, you know, maybe there's the tendency to worry or to think about, well, the future's now. If I don't come back, right, then I'm not necessarily going to be as good, or I need to get back for this competition. It sounds like, you know, over time you took a different approach to that. How did you know, I guess, in terms of when you were ready to return? How did you make that decision, or what did you do that in conjunction with other people, your coach or a physiotherapist, or?
Yeah, I had some physiotherapists who helped me out, but I think more as time went by, I was kind of good at sense my body more now, and I knew that, well, if I had this vast scale in my head, and I knew that, okay, I have to be beneath 5 or like 4 before I even consider it. I should be down 2 or 3, and then starting very slowly. So some kind of way, I since I had so many injuries, small injuries all the time, so I knew when at last I tuned in, okay, last time I was feeling like this and it wasn't okay. So I tuned in. I saw, okay, this I had to be on 2, I think, on this vast scale.
Yeah.
And then it was okay, but take 2 weeks and then just slowly heading back. So I think I developed a coping strategy, I think, to come back, or a strategy, I think, to come back in a good way.
Right. And it sounds like as part of that strategy, again, was really monitoring kind of your intensity or pain levels, or your ability to cope with certain training. And, you know, and if it was too high, or then it sounds like you wouldn't necessarily return, or you knew maybe that you said kind of like last time when I, you know, maybe came back, I experienced this. And so it sounded like a little bit of trial and error where you would learn from past experience. Yeah.
So, and then as I told you, and I was very confident that my alternative training was good. So I just relax in that and rely on myself, have self-confidence in that too. And I knew that, okay, 1 or 2 weeks more in the pool, it would do any harm.
Right.
So then I could just rely on my my confidence. So
Right.
it was good.
You
So,
mentioned also that sort of, there were progressions and you would do things kind of gradually. Was that important in building your confidence in your abilities to compete and to compete well?
yeah, well, yeah, in some way, but I was also when I was getting older, I was more like, I don't know, I'm not going to be on top now, and I could accept that. But as I told you, pretty soon afterwards, I think we say sometimes 4 or 5 weeks, and I was really back, and that was kind of surprising. But also, as I told you, it took down a little bit pressure on myself, I think, and that's so mentally it was good to just come from behind a little bit and just so I think I had a mentally advantage because
When you say come from behind, like you're the underdog compared to the other competitors, or how do you mean come from behind?
Yeah, like that. Yeah. So if you won the championship last year and then you come back and you get some pressure, but if you everyone knows that you're having an injury, so then you have this underdog etiquette on you. So
yeah. So sort of like, again, that underdog mindset sounds like it could reduce the pressure or expectation, I guess, of performing at a certain level. Would you say that based on either experience or observation that there are factors that distinguish athletes who are able to return effectively or successfully from an injury in running versus those who are unable to do so, or maybe return at a maybe lower or diminished level?
Yeah, well, of course, I think so. And you have this kind of, if you have an optimistic view or pessimistic view on yourself or the future, I think that's of course, and the self-confidence that you have built up, of course, is one. And as I told you, task-oriented or ego-oriented disposition is also very. So I think, and also if you have some pressure from outside to come back, it will be devastating for your return in competition. And also I think perfectionism is also if you have to be some kind of perfectionist, because and you have to be, let's say, very very dedicated to just go out every morning, even though it's raining and pouring rain, it's snowing and it's slippery and like that. You have to go out and you have to do your work all the time. That also is dangerous because it's hard to stop.
Yeah.
Because you have set yourself to do this. It's, as I told you, it's painful and it's a dirty job sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
And that's also kind of personality that some people are very very eager to just, they have decided I have to do this, even though it's hurting like hell. You just go out and do the stuff. And that personality is, I think, it's devastating to have too much of it.
Right. So I guess, yeah, you kind of mentioned the perfectionism on the one hand, like being dedicated and achievement oriented and striving to be the best can be helpful in some ways, but not so much when maybe it pushes you to do things that are, less than helpful or maybe in the long-term run counter to your health and well-being. And I know earlier you said, like sometimes sounded like your mindset was to push through pain always and to be tough and to, like not let the pain get in the way of your performance. So, it sounded like while that quality was driving you a lot, it also sounded like, maybe in the case of rehabilitation that it's not always so helpful. Would you say, you mentioned confidence and being optimistic. And I'm wondering for the injured athlete, like you also talked about challenges or frustrations that an athlete has. So what helps the injured athlete or the recovering athlete to be optimistic or to be confident? How can
Well,
they
past performance or past successful recovery is of course something that built my confidence in just when it comes to injury recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And also that I saw that the alternative training was so was very good for me.
Yeah.
Also built my confidence. So I was so when I was getting older, I think I was also one thing that made me not so injured was that I wasn't afraid of just stepping back when I was feeling like a little pain, because I knew, okay, it's better to take 2 or 3 weeks off here now, do the work, train more, but I train in other stuffs like so. That's helped me.
Yeah.
So that was building my confidence, which was kind of positive spiral.
Right. So you knew sort of that sometimes it was better to back off, and that, you know, you would be hurting yourself less in the long term than if you tried to push through. And when you were able to do that effectively and take time off or back off and still perform well, that it built your confidence. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think that wouldn't be possible with my first coach, because then I would felt guilty. But the second coach, she was more supportive, and okay, of course, just take some time, take the time you need. And that was very important, because as I told you before, you feel guilty sometimes to your coach, because you're getting so close, because both my coaches was one of my best friends, and I really one of my those who influenced my most in my life in a positive way. So you don't want to disappoint them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not so much about pressure. It's more like you want them to be happy like that.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead. Sorry.
No. So that you don't want to disappoint, and sometimes also, well, the second coach, I knew he was really getting the point, but I perhaps it was not so much me, but other athletes in my group. They didn't really trust him, the coach. He didn't gave this signal that it was okay to not be injured, because he was quiet. But when they say, I'm injured, okay, he was just quiet. And then they thought that he was thinking that they were cheating on him like that. But it wasn't the case. But I think that so
that's interesting, because, you know, just sort of knowing that, you know, that it was okay to be injured. Not that, of course, the coach would want you to be injured, but it sounds like in the case of your first coach, like, he didn't know how to respond, as you said, or he was uncertain. And so that left you kind of feeling unsure about whether it was okay or what he was thinking, because he couldn't really communicate that. Whereas it sounds like you had a very different experience with your second coach. And it also sounds like that was helpful for you as an injured athlete, to be able to know on some level that it was okay to be injured, or that you weren't necessarily letting the person down, because you mentioned a few times that point about guilt. And I imagine that's common, right, for injured athletes, where they're thinking, okay, I'm feeling bad because I'm letting the team down, or my coach, or, you know, I should be out there doing, you know, contributing, and I'm not contributing. Certainly there's research support for that. If you were to share one piece of advice for injured athletes, Stefan, again, based on your experience or coaching in floorball, or working with floorball, and obviously as an elite athlete, what would you suggest?
Well, I would suggest to have a coach that you can talk with, that really understands you, and don't get suspicious if you get injured. Just more like eager to help you. To have a coach that really understands, and try to build that trust with a coach. That's important. Also do some really good alternative training that you know is good for you, and get confident, and also perhaps you can train more because you're using other parts of your body, perhaps. So I think look at that as a possibility to excel.
Right.
And also, I think, as I told you, just to put some more task-oriented goals for yourself, and try to take some time off, and when you're injured, to work with yourself and mentally rehearsal the way, and try to, in other areas in life, to challenge you to set up some more task-oriented goals.
Right. And it sounds like, again, when you were injured, you really sort of took the opportunity to, improve different elements of your running, or to find different ways to keep yourself strong or fit, or so again, kind of, focusing on the things that you could do to maintain your performance, and to really, as you say, kind of focus in on the task elements of running, or the process, I guess, of being a good runner rather than the results. Those are great insights and pieces of advice and suggestions, and obviously, having competed at such a high level for many years, and having gone through injury, it's great to have you share your experiences. So thanks for taking the time, Stefan, to speak with me.
Nice talking to you. Yeah,
appreciate it.
Interesting questions. It's nice to be here, and it's a pleasure always to talk to you guys. So.
Thanks for speaking with me, Stefan.